blood in the streets. By Gideon Chase. Chapter 1. A Ghost from the Past. The rain hit the pavement like 1,000 tiny hammers, each drop a rhythmic reminder of the chaos that lurked just beneath the surface of the city. Detective Jonah Cruz stood under the flickering neon sign of a run-down diner, the stale air of the alley surrounding him, mixing with the smell of wet concrete and diesel. His collar was turned up against the chill, his coat soaked through, but it wasn't the cold that made his bones ache. It was the case, and the face that haunted it. The call had come in just after midnight. Another body, this time in an abandoned warehouse near the docks. Another victim, another part of the same string of murders that had been plaguing the city for weeks. At first it had seemed random, gangland hits, the sort of thing Cruz had seen 100 times before. But then the pattern emerged. The victims were connected, tied together by a single thread, a name that Cruz hadn't heard in years. Evelyn Kane. It had been a lifetime ago when Evelyn had walked into his life. He had been fresh out of the academy, eager to prove himself. She had been a rising star in the criminal world, a ruthless mastermind with a penchant for manipulation. She had vanished after a botched operation, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of her empire and a trail of broken lives. Cruz had thought her dead, thought that the case had been closed for good. But now it seemed like she was back, her shadow stretching across the city, each murder a message. And Cruz had a sinking feeling that he was the one being called to read it. Detective Cruz, a voice called from behind him, snapping him from his thoughts. He turned to see Officer Miller, the rookie who had been assigned to his team a few months ago. Miller's face was pale, his eyes wide, like he had seen a ghost. "The body's inside," Miller said, his voice tight. "You're going to want to see this." Cruz nodded and followed him into the warehouse. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Dust and grime covered the walls, and the air smelled stale, like forgotten things. Cruz's eyes scanned the room, moving past old crates and broken furniture until they landed on the center of the floor. The body. It was a man, middle-aged, disheveled, with a rough look about him. He was lying face down in a pool of his own blood, a jagged wound across his neck. But it wasn't the wound that caught Cruz's attention. It was the pattern of the blood, the way it spread across the floor in a strange, deliberate shape. A symbol. A sigil that Cruz recognized all too well. A serpent. He felt his stomach twist. It was the same symbol that had been found at the other crime scenes. The same symbol that had marked Evelyn Kane's operations back in the day. "Another one," Cruz muttered under his breath, kneeling next to the body. His gloved fingers traced the symbol in the blood, a chill running down his spine. Miller stepped closer, his face filled with confusion. "What does it mean? Why would she—" "Not her," Cruz interrupted sharply, his mind racing. "This isn't her work. Not exactly. But whoever's doing this, they're sending a message. And I think they're targeting me." Miller looked at him, bewildered. "Targeting you? Why?" Cruz stood, his jaw clenched. "Because someone wants me to remember. Someone wants me to dig into the past. And if that means killing people to get my attention, then that's exactly what they'll do." The weight of the thought hit him hard, but he didn't let it show. He couldn't afford to let it show. Not now. Not when he was staring down the barrel of a case that seemed designed specifically for him. It was a twisted game, and he had no idea who was pulling the strings. All he knew was that Evelyn Kane's ghost was walking the streets again, and it wasn't a coincidence. Cruz turned to Miller. "Get a team out here to secure the scene. I'm going to need a full report on every murder tied to this symbol. and I want to know everything there is about a man named Thomas Doherty." Miller looked uncertain. "Thomas Doherty? You think he's connected?" Cruz didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the back of the warehouse, his boots clicking on the concrete floor. His mind was already moving faster than he could keep up with. Doherty was a name from his past, one that had faded into the background after the fall of Evelyn Kane. But now, with the murders and the sigil, the name was rising to the surface again. He had to know what role Doherty played in all of this. "Do it, Miller," Cruz said, his voice low. "I've got a feeling we're just scratching the surface." Miller hesitated, then nodded. "Got it, Detective." Cruz stepped into the shadows of the warehouse, feeling the weight of the city pressing in around him. The rain had stopped, but the storm was far from over, and as he stood there, staring at the blood-stained symbol, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn deeper into a game that had already been set in motion long before he arrived. A game where the stakes were higher than he could ever imagine. Chapter 2: The Return of the Ghost. The city's skyline loomed like a jagged tooth, cutting into the darkness, and Cruz couldn't shake the sense of being trapped in a maze that only tightened the more he tried to navigate it. The world outside was noisy, chaotic, a place he didn't care to belong. But his mind kept drifting back to that symbol, the blood, and the name that seemed to haunt him from every shadow: Evelyn Kane. He hadn't seen her in over a decade, not since the operation that had left his career hanging by a thread, not since her disappearance had sent ripples through the city's underworld. She had been the queen of the streets back then, a woman whose ruthless ambition had torn through criminal empires like a hurricane. Everyone had feared her, respected her, and then, just as quickly, she vanished. But now it seemed like she was back in a form he hadn't expected. Cruz sat at his desk in the dimly lit precinct, the file in front of him, a reminder of how far the city had fallen since those days. The paperwork on his desk was stacked high, but his focus was on the case, on Evelyn, and the man who had been linked to her past, Thomas Doherty. He ran his fingers over the worn pages, flipping through old case files, hoping for something, anything, that would explain the strange connection between the murders and Doherty's name. Doherty had been a small-time player when Cruz first met him, a crooked businessman with ties to local gangs, laundering money, playing both sides of the law. But Evelyn Kane had known how to exploit men like him, how to twist them into pawns. If she was involved again, he needed to understand how. The precinct door swung open, and Cruz looked up to find his partner, Detective Rachel Reyes, stepping inside. She was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed, with a no-nonsense demeanor that had earned her respect on the force. Her face was grim, and she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We got a hit on Doherty," she said, tossing a manila folder on his desk. "It's not good." Cruz leaned forward, his heart rate picking up. "What'd you find?" Reyes flipped open the folder, pulling out a series of photographs. Each one showed a different angle of a man, Thomas Doherty. In one, he was standing in front of a luxury car, smiling with a woman at his side. In another, he was shaking hands with a group of men in suits, their faces hidden by shadows. But the most recent photo, the one that caught Cruz's attention, was a mugshot. Doherty was older now, more weathered, but his eyes still held that same sharp, calculating look. "He's back in town," Reyes continued. "The police in Detroit have confirmed he was seen here last week. Seems like he's been involved in some kind of money laundering operation again. But the strange thing is, no one can trace his exact movements. It's like he's been hiding in plain sight." Cruz narrowed his eyes, running a hand through his hair. "And the connection to the murders?" Reyes hesitated before answering. "We think someone's using him as a pawn. We found traces of his money in the accounts of several of the victims. And here's the kicker. 2 of the bodies we found had Doherty's name written in their journals. One of them was a man named Michael Dawson, a low-level dealer. The other was a woman, Clara Westbrook. She was known to have ties to Evelyn Kane's old crew. Cruz's pulse quickened. What the hell is going on, Rachel? Why would they leave these traces, these breadcrumbs? Reyes stared at the photos of Doherty. It's almost like someone's trying to bait you. The air between them grew heavy as the realization hit Cruz. Someone was targeting him. Someone wanted him to dig up the past, to confront whatever dark secrets had been buried for years. Get me everything on Clara Westbrook, Cruz said, his voice low. And start pulling the surveillance footage from the areas where Doherty's been seen. We need to find him, and we need to do it fast. Reyes nodded and left, the door closing softly behind her. Cruz sat back in his chair, staring at the case files. Evelyn Kane's shadow was long, and it was stretching across every part of this investigation. He didn't know why she was back, or who was pulling the strings, but he could feel the pressure mounting. The past was closing in on him, and he was no closer to understanding why. He picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. The line rang 3 times before it was picked up. Yeah? Langston, Cruz said, his voice gravelly. I need your help. There was a brief pause on the other end. Cruz? You don't call me unless you need something big. What's the deal? I'm looking for information on Evelyn Kane. She's connected to a series of murders, and I need to know if she's back in town. I know you've got people on the inside. Find out what you can. Langston's tone shifted, the familiar sarcasm replaced by a more serious edge. I'll see what I can do. But Cruz, if Kane's involved again, you're going to want to be real careful. You don't want to go digging too deep into that mess. I don't have a choice, Cruz said, his jaw tightening. I'll be in touch. He hung up the phone, the weight of his decisions pressing harder than ever. Evelyn Kane was a ghost, but her return meant that everything had changed. The city was her playground again, and the games she played were always deadly. Cruz looked out the window, his gaze scanning the streets below. The rain had started again, a steady drizzle that matched the rhythm of his thoughts. He could feel it, the pull of the past, the sense that everything he had worked for was unraveling. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't outrun it. And the longer he waited, the more the city would bleed. Chapter 3: Into the Abyss. The city's streets were slick with rain, reflecting the glow of neon lights that flickered erratically as if even the lights knew something dark was coming. Cruz sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel, his thoughts as heavy as the storm clouds above. The case had taken a sharp turn, spiraling into an abyss he wasn't sure he could escape. But he had no choice. His hands were tied to this, and there was no turning back. The rain didn't help. It never did. It only seemed to amplify the noise in his head, the feeling that something was about to snap. The connection to Evelyn Kane, the bloodstains, the sigil, the serpent that kept reappearing at every crime scene, it all pointed toward one thing. Whoever was behind this, they were setting him up. And Cruz wasn't the type to be played. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his reverie. It was Reyes. I've got something, she said, her voice tight. Clara Westbrook's last known address. It's a rundown apartment building on the east side. We're going in now. On my way, Cruz replied. His pulse quickened. The east side wasn't the safest place, but it was exactly the kind of place where people with dark secrets and even darker motives could hide. The drive across the city was quick, the lights of the streets blurring into a kaleidoscope of color. Cruz knew this side of town well. He had walked these streets when he was younger, when he had been hungry for justice, not the bitterness that had come to define him now. He parked a few blocks from the building and walked toward the entrance, his jacket collar pulled high against the chill. Reyes was already there, standing under the awning of the building's entrance, her arms crossed, eyes scanning the shadows. When she saw Cruz, she nodded, her face grim. Clara Westbrook's last known address, she said, glancing at the cracked door. She had a rough life. She was tied to Kane's crew, but after everything fell apart, she disappeared. No one knew where she went. Cruz wasn't surprised. People who had ties to Evelyn Kane had a tendency to vanish or end up dead. Let's get inside, Cruz said, stepping forward. The building smelled like decay, old food, cigarette smoke, and the sour scent of neglect. The stairwell creaked under their weight as they made their way up to the second floor. Cruz could feel the weight of the place, the desperation that clung to the walls. It was a reflection of the city itself, broken, forgotten. When they reached the apartment door, Cruz noticed the faint smear of blood along the frame. His hand instinctively went to his gun, but Reyes was already ahead of him, pushing the door open. The room inside was dimly lit, its sparse furniture covered in dust. There was a smell here, too, but it wasn't the kind of smell that came from neglect. It was the sharp, metallic taint of blood. Cruz's eyes scanned the room quickly. The walls were marked with black smudges, and the window was cracked. The place had clearly been ransacked, but what caught his attention was the table in the corner, papers scattered across it, photographs taped to the wall, and a large map of the city. There were red pens marking certain locations. This isn't just a random hideout, Cruz muttered, stepping closer to the table. He picked up a few of the photographs, shots of people he recognized from the earlier murders. There was one of Thomas Doherty, looking out of place in the mix of low-level criminals. And there was Evelyn Kane's face, as sharp and cold as it had been years ago. This is Kane's operation, Reyes said, her voice low. Someone's trying to resurrect it. Cruz's fingers hovered over the map. The red pins didn't tell him much. But the dots formed a pattern that led straight to the city's most dangerous districts. The kind of places where deals were made in the shadows and blood was spilled for the price of loyalty. I think we're getting closer, Cruz said, his voice steady. Someone's using Kane's methods, and they're willing to kill anyone who gets in their way. Reyes looked at him, her expression hardening. You think it's Doherty? He's the one who's been leaving all the breadcrumbs? I don't know, Cruz said, narrowing his eyes at the map. But I think he's just a player in someone else's game. Kane's game. Whoever is behind this is setting up a chessboard, and we're all just pieces. It's like they're drawing me into something bigger than I've ever imagined. They scoured the rest of the apartment, finding little else of significance. Cruz's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The serpent's, Doherty's involvement, Clara Westbrook's death. It was all connected, but the thread that tied it together remained elusive. Anything? Reyes asked, as they stood in the hallway, about to leave. No, Cruz said, frustration creeping into his voice. But we're not done yet. Whoever's doing this, they're playing us, and they're using my past to get to me. As they made their way back down the stairs, Cruz couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His instincts told him they were walking into a trap, but he had no choice but to follow the trail. If Evelyn Kane's empire was returning, then it was more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. Hours later, Cruz sat at his desk in the precinct, the rain still falling outside. He stared at the map they had found, the pins scattered across the city like a web waiting to catch him. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Langston. It was brief, but it sent a chill down his spine. I've got something. Meet me at the usual place. Don't bring anyone. Cruz didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, his heart pounding. Whatever Langston had, it was the next piece of the puzzle. He just hoped it wouldn't be the one that broke him. Chapter 4. Beneath the Surface. The usual place was a quiet bar tucked in the heart of the city's industrial district, a place that looked like it had barely survived the last decade. The neon sign above the door buzzed intermittently, casting an eerie red glow on the cracked sidewalk. Cruz stood outside for a moment, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on him. He wasn't sure what Langston had, but his gut told him it wasn't good. He pushed the door open, the bell above it ringing softly. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer. A few patrons sat at the bar nursing their drinks, but they paid no attention to Cruz as he made his way to the back corner. Langston was already there, sitting in the shadows, his face partially obscured by the dim light. Langston was an informant, someone who lived on the fringes of the law, feeding Cruz information that no one else could get. He had always been reliable, but Cruz could sense something had changed in the way Langston was looking at him tonight. "You got something?" Cruz asked, taking a seat across from him. Langston didn't respond immediately. He took a long drag from his cigarette, the ember glowing red in the low light. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conspiratorial. "It's worse than you think, Cruz," Langston said, his voice hoarse. "The whole city's being played, but you're the main target. Whoever's behind this isn't just going after the people you've been investigating. They want you to dig deeper, to uncover the ghosts of your past. And it's all tied to Evelyn Kane." Cruz leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "I know it's tied to her, but why now? Why drag me into this after all these years?" Langston's eyes flickered to the side, as if he was making sure no one was listening. "It's not just her. It's them." "Them?" Cruz echoed, confusion creeping into his voice. Langston pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. Cruz opened it without hesitation, his eyes scanning the contents quickly. There were photographs, grainy, taken from afar, but still sharp enough to make out the faces. Some of them were familiar: Thomas Doherty, Clara Westbrook, and even a few others who had slipped through the cracks of Cruz's investigation. But there were more people here, faces he didn't recognize. Langston leaned in, his voice lower now. "These are the players, Cruz. They're the ones behind everything. They're not just criminals. They're connected to something bigger, something you won't be able to stop unless you understand the full scope of it." Cruz felt a chill run down his spine as he flipped through the photographs. Each one seemed to reveal a new layer of the conspiracy, a network of faces, tied together by something Cruz couldn't yet see. "Who are these people?" Cruz asked, his voice tight with frustration. Langston shook his head. "I don't know all of them. But what I do know is that they're using Doherty, using Kane's old network to fuel something much darker. And you're in the middle of it. Whoever is orchestrating this, they've been watching you from the beginning." Cruz's mind raced as he stared at the photos. This wasn't just about Evelyn Kane's empire anymore. It wasn't about her revenge or her return to power. This was about something far more insidious, a game being played with him as the pawn. "The thing is," Langston continued, his voice dropping even further, "they know what you're looking for. They want you to find the truth, but they're leading you straight into a trap. And the only way out is to play their game." Cruz clenched his fists, the anger rising in his chest. He had spent too many years chasing shadows, too many years running after ghosts. And now they were all coming back. He could feel the pull of the past, Evelyn, the murders, the dark secrets that had been buried for too long. And the deeper he went, the more it seemed like there was no way out. "I'm done running," Cruz muttered under his breath. "I'll find them. I'll find whoever is behind this." Langston looked at him for a long moment before responding. "Be careful, Cruz. You're not just dealing with criminals anymore. You're dealing with people who have power, people who can make you disappear without a trace, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Cruz's hand trembled as he closed the folder. "What's the next step?" Langston leaned back in his chair, his eyes darting toward the door. "The next step is simple. You follow the money. Doherty's been laundering cash through a shell company. He's been using it to fund operations, but it's not just a business anymore. There's something bigger at play. something that ties directly into Kane's old empire. Cruz stood up, his mind already racing through the possibilities. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the city pressing in on him. He had no idea what he was walking into, but one thing was certain: the game had changed, and there was no going back. "I'll check it out," Cruz said, his voice firm. "But if you're lying to me, Langston—" "I'm not lying," Langston interrupted, his eyes wide with genuine fear. "I'm telling you, you can't trust anyone anymore. Not even me. Whole cities under their thumb. You're too deep into this, and the deeper you go, the more they'll come for you." Cruz didn't respond. He turned and walked out of the bar, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As the door swung shut behind him, he could hear Langston's voice calling out to him, but he didn't turn back. The storm was coming, and Cruz would be ready. Hours later, Cruz sat at his desk again, the city's lights blinking in the distance. He opened the folder Langston had given him once more, studying the photographs, the faces of people who had been hidden in the shadows. He didn't know who they were, but he knew one thing for sure: this was bigger than anything he had ever faced before. In Evelyn Kane, she wasn't just a ghost anymore. She was the key. Chapter 5: The Invisible Enemy. The rain was relentless, falling in sheets as Cruz pulled into the parking lot of the warehouse on the edge of the city. The place looked abandoned, an industrial relic from a time when things had been more vibrant. Now it was just another shadow in a city filled with them. But Cruz knew better. Langston's tip had been clear. This warehouse was connected to Doherty's operations, and if he was going to get any answers, it was here he needed to be. The air smelled of wet concrete and rust as Cruz exited his car, the headlights casting long, ghostly shadows on the cracked pavement. He adjusted the collar of his jacket against the cold and moved toward the entrance, each step heavier than the last. Inside, he could hear the faint hum of machinery, the kind that hadn't been used in years. The door to the warehouse was unlocked. Cruz pushed it open, the metal scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo louder than it should have. The interior was dim, lit only by the flickering overhead lights that buzzed intermittently. The place was cavernous, rows of rusted shelves stacked high with crates that hadn't been touched in years. He wasn't alone. Cruz froze as he noticed the figure standing in the center of the room, illuminated by the harsh, flickering lights above. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face obscured by the shadows. Cruz's hand went instinctively to his holster, but the man raised his hand, signaling that he meant no harm. "Detective Cruz," the man said, his voice calm and measured, with an eerie undercurrent of familiarity. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Cruz narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" The man stepped closer, his face finally coming into view. It was someone Cruz hadn't seen in years, someone from his past, someone he had hoped would stay buried. "Don't look so surprised," the man said, a small smirk playing on his lips. "I'm just another ghost from your past, the one you didn't get to kill." Cruz's heart skipped a beat. Victor. What the hell are you doing here? Victor Crane was a name Cruz had tried to forget. A former associate of Evelyn Kane, a man with a reputation for being just as dangerous as he was cunning. Years ago, Cruz had thought he had killed him, taken him down for his involvement in several brutal killings. But apparently, Victor had survived, and now he was standing in front of him, as if no time had passed at all. Victor's smirk deepened. "You thought I was dead, didn't you? But you were wrong. I've been watching you. All of you." Cruz took a step forward, his pulse hammering in his chest. "You're behind all of this, aren't you? This entire mess. Doherty, the murders, everything. It's your game." Victor's eyes gleamed with a dark amusement. "Game? Oh no, Cruz. This isn't a game. This is survival. And you're playing right in my hands. Cruz's mind raced. He had known the name Victor Crane long before he had ever heard of Evelyn Kane. Crane had been one of the key players in the underground network of crime that had plagued the city for years. But when Kane had taken over, Crane had vanished, presumed dead. Now, standing in front of Cruz, it was clear that nothing was as it seemed. "You're working with Kane, aren't you?" Cruz said, his voice hard. "You're using Doherty's name to pull the strings, to bring everything back." Victor laughed, the sound echoing off the cold walls. "Kane's long gone, Cruz. She's been gone for years. But the empire she built? It never died. It just went underground. And I've been running it ever since. Doherty was a means to an end. The others? They're just tools. But you, Cruz, you've been a part of this all along. You just never realized it." Cruz's stomach twisted. "You're saying I'm part of your plan?" Victor stepped closer, his eyes locking with Cruz's. "You think you're investigating this case, but you're just following the trail I laid out for you. You've been my pawn from the beginning. Every step you've taken, every move you've made, it's all been to lead you here. To me." Cruz took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He couldn't afford to let Victor see how much his words were affecting him. He had to stay focused. He had to find a way out of this. "So what now, Crane?" Cruz asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside. "You want me to join you? To be a part of your sick little game?" Victor's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "No, Cruz, I don't need you to join me. I need you to die. You're the last loose end, the one thing standing in the way of the plan being completed. And I'm not going to let that go." Before Cruz could react, Victor snapped his fingers. Two figures emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden beneath hoods, each holding a gun. Cruz's heart raced. He was outnumbered, trapped in the vast, empty warehouse with nowhere to run. "Goodbye, Cruz," Victor said, stepping back, his eyes cold and triumphant. "You've been a worthy opponent, but this is where it ends." The two figures moved in, their guns raised, ready to end this. Cruz didn't hesitate. He had no other choice. He lunged to the side, narrowly avoiding the first shot that rang out, the sound deafening in the empty space. He rolled behind one of the large crates, his breath quick and shallow. He could hear the footsteps of the two figures as they moved closer, searching for him. Cruz's mind was working in overdrive. He had to take them out. But how? His hand found the grip of his gun, fingers cold and steady. He peeked around the corner of the crate, scanning the room for an opening. He knew Victor was watching, waiting for him to make his move. Taking a deep breath, Cruz sprang from behind the crate, firing a single shot that hit one of the figures in the shoulder. The man staggered, dropping his gun. The other figure turned toward Cruz, but it was too late. Cruz fired again, this time hitting his target in the chest. The man fell, crashing to the ground with a heavy thud. Victor's voice rang out, cold and furious. "You think you've won, Cruz? You're just digging your own grave." Cruz didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, closing the distance between himself and Victor. He had to end this now, before it was too late. Victor backed away, his expression darkening. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing." But Cruz wasn't listening anymore. He lunged at Victor, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "I'm not done yet, Crane," Cruz spat, his voice filled with venom. "And neither are you." Chapter 6: The Price of Truth. Cruz's grip tightened around Victor's collar, his heart pounding with a mix of rage and disbelief. The man who had haunted his past, the one responsible for so much pain and loss, was standing in front of him again, alive. And now Cruz had the chance to finish what he had started all those years ago. Victor's face twisted into a grimace as he struggled to free himself from Cruz's hold, his breath coming in sharp, strained gasps. But Cruz didn't budge. He pressed him harder against the wall, his eyes blazing with fury. "Why, Victor?" Cruz growled. "Why bring this all back? You could have stayed out of it. You could have stayed dead." Victor's lips curled into a cruel smile, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling calmness. "You still don't get it, do you, Cruz? This was never about staying dead. This is about control, power. The city was always a game. And now it's my turn to win." Cruz's jaw clenched. He wanted to beat the truth out of Victor, but he knew that wouldn't work. He needed answers, and this bastard was the only one who had them. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" Cruz hissed, his grip tightening. "You think I'm just another one of your pawns?" Victor laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that reverberated off the walls. "No, Cruz, you've never been a pawn. You've always been a threat. The only reason you're still alive is because you were too valuable. But now you're in my way." Cruz's mind raced. Victor's words were poison, seeping into every corner of his thoughts. He had underestimated how deep this went, how tangled it all was. Dirty's operation, the murders, the web of lies, it was all connected. And now Cruz was standing in the heart of it. "I don't care about your empire," Cruz spat, his voice low. "I don't care about your games. I'm ending this, and I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done." Victor's eyes narrowed, his smirk never fading. "You really think you can just take me down like that? You're alone, Cruz. You've always been alone. And when it comes down to it, no one's going to back you." Cruz's breath came in ragged bursts as he shoved Victor back, slamming him into the ground. He could feel the weight of everything crashing down on him. All the unanswered questions, the missed opportunities, the years he had spent chasing shadows, it all led to this moment. "You're wrong," Cruz said, his voice cold. "I'm not alone." Victor's expression faltered for a moment, his eyes flickering with something that resembled doubt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a calculating look. "I've been following you for years, Cruz," Victor said, slowly pushing himself to his feet. "Watching you chase ghosts. You never realized, did you? You've been part of this whole thing from the start. Doherty was just another pawn, just like you. The real players have always been above you, watching from the shadows." Cruz's head snapped up. "What the hell are you talking about?" Victor let out a slow sigh, as if explaining something obvious. The city was never just about crime. It was about control. Every drug deal, every murder, every power struggle, it was all designed to push the right people into the right places. You think Doherty was a player? He was a tool. The true power lies in the people that are pulling the strings. People you've never even met. Cruz's heart skipped a beat. The implications of Victor's words hit him like a slap to the face. All this time, all the years spent chasing leads and working cases, it had all been part of a larger game, and he had been too blind to see it. "You're telling me this whole thing is bigger than Doherty?" Cruz's voice was barely above a whisper, the weight of the realization settling in. "Who's behind it all, Victor? Who's the one pulling the strings?" Victor leaned in closer, his breath hot against Cruz's ear. "You'll find out soon enough. But remember this, Cruz, when you dig too deep, the truth has a price, and the higher you climb, the further you fall." Before Cruz could respond, Victor was gone, disappearing into the shadows with a speed and silence that left Cruz standing there, feeling more lost than ever. The silence in the warehouse was deafening. Cruz stood frozen, his mind spinning with the enormity of what he had just heard. Victor's words echoed in his head, each one heavier than the last. He had known there were powerful forces at play, but this was something entirely different. Someone else was controlling the game, and Cruz had been too focused on the wrong pieces to notice. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the city's secrets pressing down on him. But there was no time to waste. He had to move. He had to get back to the investigation, back to finding the truth. But now, that truth seemed even more elusive than before. Who were the people Victor had spoken of? Who were the ones controlling everything from the shadows? And what was their endgame? Cruz didn't have the answers, but he would. He walked toward the door, his steps purposeful and steady. The rain had stopped, but the night was still heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. He knew that every answer he uncovered would only lead to more questions. But that was the nature of this city. And the streets, nothing was ever as it seemed. And Cruz had learned the hard way that sometimes the more you search for the truth, the more it fights back. As Cruz made his way back to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced over his shoulder but saw nothing. The streets were empty, silent. It was the calm before the storm, and Cruz knew deep down that things were about to get much worse. Chapter 7: The Descent. Cruz didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind was filled with the echoes of Victor's words, a constant hum beneath his thoughts. The city was a game. You've been part of it from the start. The realization was suffocating. He had spent his entire career thinking he was fighting for justice, chasing criminals, bringing down bad guys. But now it felt like he had been played for a fool. He had spent all this time on the periphery, never once considering the true power that lurked behind the scenes. He lit another cigarette, his third in the past hour. His hands were shaking, his jaw tightened with frustration. He needed to push through it. The answers were out there, somewhere, buried in the debris of this broken city. He just had to keep digging. The sharp ring of his phone cut through the silence. Cruz's heart skipped a beat as he saw the name on the caller ID, Detective Randall, the same detective who had worked alongside him on the Doherty case. Cruz didn't trust him, never had, but the man had been a source of information over the years, albeit unreliable at best. Cruz, Randall's voice was clipped, the urgency in his tone immediately evident. We've got a lead. It's big. You need to come down to the station. Cruz ground out the cigarette with his boot, standing up abruptly. He grabbed his coat and pulled it on as he listened, his mind already racing through the possibilities. What's the lead? Cruz asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Just get here, Randall said before hanging up. The line went dead, leaving only the thudding of Cruz's heart in the quiet apartment. It was a summons he couldn't ignore. Not when there were still pieces to the puzzle that had to be put together. Not when he was so close to the truth. The drive to the station was a blur. Cruz's mind was occupied by the mystery of Victor and the cryptic words he had left behind. He could still feel the man's presence lingering in his thoughts like a shadow, pushing him forward, dragging him deeper into something darker. When Cruz pulled into the parking lot, his headlights cast long shadows across the empty spaces. He slammed the car door and made his way toward the entrance, the sharp sound of his boots echoing through the otherwise deserted lot. Inside, the station was dimly lit, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound breaking the stillness. Detective Randall stood near the desk, speaking to a uniformed officer who nodded before walking away. Cruz didn't wait for the man to approach him. He could feel Randall's eyes on him, the tension between them palpable. They had never been on the same side, not really, but right now they had a common goal. Cruz, Randall said, his voice low but insistent. "We got something. One of the officers on the street witnessed something that connects the murders to a high-profile person. We're talking about someone with power, someone who can cover their tracks." Cruz narrowed his eyes. "Who?" Randall didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a file from the desk drawer and slid it across the table. It was thick, a collection of names, dates, and photographs. Cruz opened it without hesitation. The first page was a list of recent victims. There were 6 in total, each one with a connection to the criminal underworld. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary at first glance, but as he turned the pages, his blood ran cold. The deeper Cruz dug, the more he realized the connections weren't random. The list was expanding. A few names down, Cruz's eyes landed on a name he knew all too well. Detective Eleanor Fox. She was one of the few good cops left, and the thought of her being involved in this mess made his stomach twist. The woman who had fought beside him, the one person he trusted more than anyone else. Her name was tied to the murders. Cruz flipped through the pages, but the pieces weren't falling into place. Nothing made sense. He stared at the file for a moment, fighting the wave of confusion and doubt that threatened to drown him. There had to be something he was missing. "Randall," Cruz said, his voice low, almost dangerous. "What the hell is this? Fox? How is she connected to all this?" Randall didn't meet his eyes. "We don't know yet, but the officer saw her at the scene of the last murder. We're digging into it, Cruz, but she's not the only one. We think there's a whole network operating under the radar. Powerful people. People who can make anyone disappear." Cruz felt the blood drain from his face. Fox had been on the case with him for years. She had always been a steady presence, someone he could trust without question. The thought of her being part of something this twisted sent a chill through him. But he couldn't afford to jump to conclusions. Not yet. Not when the truth was still so damn elusive. "Where's she now?" Cruz asked, his voice a mixture of fear and determination. Randall hesitated. "We've got a team watching her. For now, we need to keep our distance." The words hung in the air like a bad omen. Cruz couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the edge of something far worse than he had imagined. The city was darker than he ever realized, and the people he thought he knew, the ones he thought he could trust, were becoming enemies in their own right. He closed the file with a snap and stood up, his mind already calculating his next move. If Fox was involved in this, there was no telling who else might be. There was no telling who was really pulling the strings. "I'm going after her," Cruz said, his voice steely. "I need answers, and I'll find them, no matter what." Randall's eyes widened, but he didn't argue. "You're going to get yourself killed, Cruz. You can't do this alone." Cruz didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had already made up his mind. The night air felt colder than usual as Cruz stepped out of the station, his coat pulled tightly around him. His car seemed miles away, yet every step toward it felt like a step into the unknown. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. He was walking into the heart of darkness, and there was no turning back now. Chapter 8: The Betrayal. Cruz sat behind the wheel of his car, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled tension. The city stretched out before him like a maze of fractured memories and hidden secrets, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows over his path. He wasn't sure if he was chasing the truth or running from it. Maybe both. His mind kept going back to Fox. The thought of her, his partner, his ally, being involved in the web of corruption and violence that had infected the city was almost too much to bear. He couldn't reconcile the woman he knew with the name in that file, the woman who had always stood by his side, unwavering in her commitment to justice. But there was no denying the evidence. She had been at the scene. The thought gnawed at him, pulling him deeper into the darkness. What had he missed? What had Fox been hiding all this time? And why? The questions were endless, but the answers seemed as distant as the stars in the sky. His phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the screen, his heart skipping a beat when he saw the caller ID, Detective Randall. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight. Talk to me. There's something you need to know, Cruz, Randall said, his voice strained low. It's about Fox. She's not just involved, she's the one pulling the strings. Cruz's heart stopped. The words didn't make sense. Fox? The person he had trusted more than anyone else was orchestrating the murders? What the hell are you talking about? Cruz's voice rose, panic starting to edge in. I've been digging deeper, Cruz. There's more to this than we thought. Fox is a part of a larger operation, one that runs the underworld in this city. She's the one who's been protecting people, cleaning up messes for years. She's been playing us both from the start. The air seemed to freeze around Cruz as he processed the words. Every instinct he had, every shred of loyalty he'd felt toward her, shattered with the realization. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He couldn't move. Are you sure about this? Cruz finally managed to rasp. I've got the proof. We've been monitoring her for weeks. She's been meeting with a guy named Victor, the same guy you've been chasing. They're tied together, Cruz. I think Fox is the one who got you involved in this mess. She set you up. Cruz slammed the heel of his hand against the dashboard, the force of it echoing in the silence of the car. He wanted to scream. He wanted to rage against the injustice of it all. But there was no time for that. There was only one thing left to do. Where is she? Cruz's voice was a low growl, full of fury. I've got eyes on her right now, Randall said, the tension in his voice palpable. But she's not going down easy. She got backup. You need to be careful. I'm going alone, Cruz said, the decision final. I don't trust anyone right now. Before Randall could protest, Cruz hung up the phone and threw it onto the passenger seat. His thoughts were racing, but there was no time to waste. He couldn't wait for reinforcements. Fox was his responsibility. She had been his partner, his friend. Now she was his enemy, and he was going to make sure she paid for her betrayal. The drive was agonizingly long, each second stretching into infinity as Cruz fought to keep his thoughts from spiraling. His mind kept replaying the moments they had shared, the late-night stakeouts, the quiet conversations over coffee, the laughter, the trust. It all felt like a lie now. A carefully crafted illusion that had kept him blind to the truth. The address Randall had given him was in the heart of the city, tucked away in a part of town that Cruz knew all too well, the abandoned warehouse district, a place where secrets were buried and where no one went unless they had something to hide. When Cruz arrived, the street was eerily quiet, the buildings looming like monolithic shadows in the night. He parked his car a few blocks away, keeping to the shadows as he approached on foot. His senses were on high alert. Every sound, every movement felt like a potential threat. He moved with purpose, his gun secured at his side, ready for whatever might come. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows boarded up, its doors locked tight. But Cruz had learned long ago that no place was truly impenetrable. He had seen too many criminals think they could hide in plain sight. He found an entry point on the side of the building, a rusted fire escape ladder that led up to a narrow ledge. Cruz climbed quickly, his body moving with practiced efficiency. When he reached the top, he crouched low, his eyes scanning the area. Through the cracks in the wall, he could see movement inside. Fox. She was there, standing in the center of the room, speaking to someone, Cruz couldn't make out the words, but he could hear the tension in their voices. His pulse quickened as he took a step closer, but the floor creaked beneath him. Fox's head snapped in his direction. Cruz froze, his heart pounding in his chest. She had seen him. She didn't move, but the look in her eyes was cold, calculating. She had known he was coming. Cruz, she called, her voice carrying through the empty warehouse. I knew you'd come. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. You don't have to do this, Fox. Whatever it is, whatever Victor has promised you, it's not worth it. I know you. You're better than this. Fox's lips curled into a small, humorless smile. You don't know me, Cruz. You never did. With a swift motion, she reached into her coat and pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at him. Cruz's breath caught in his throat. His body tensed, ready to react. But before he could move, another voice cut through the tension. Drop the gun, Cruz. Victor. He stepped out from the shadows, his expression as cold and calculating as Fox's. Cruz's heart sank. This was it. The truth he had been chasing had come full circle. Victor had been behind everything. Fox had been working with him all along. You made a mistake, Cruz said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his chest. You never should have crossed me. Victor's smile was icy. It's not personal, Cruz. It's business. And with that, the world around Cruz seemed to shift, the shadows closing in tighter, and the walls of betrayal closing in around him. Chapter 9, The Breaking Point. The barrel of the gun felt cold against Cruz's chest. His breath came in shallow gasps, each second dragging him further into a nightmare of his own making. He hadn't wanted this, hadn't wanted to find himself standing here, caught between the woman he trusted and the man who had orchestrated it all. Victor stood in front of him, his eyes gleaming with a dark satisfaction. Fox, too, was unwavering, her expression distant, detached. She was no longer the woman he'd partnered with on cases, no longer the person who had shared secrets and confided in him during the long nights on the streets. She was just another face in the crowd of the damned now. You don't have to do this, Cruz said, his voice hoarse but steady, his mind racing for a way out. I know you, Fox. You're not a killer. Fox's lips twitched at the corner, but she didn't respond. Her hand tightened around the grip of the gun, her stance cold, calculated. For the first time, Cruz realized that whatever she had once been, whatever he had thought they had shared, was gone. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back for her now. But Cruz had to keep fighting. He had to find a way out. There was no room for hesitation. He needed to keep his wits sharp, to push past the gnawing pain of betrayal. He stepped back slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. He kept his gaze locked on Fox, trying to make sense of the betrayal in her eyes. He had to understand. He needed to know why. Fox, he said, his voice quieter this time. Why? After everything, we were partners. We had something real. This wasn't the way it was supposed to go down. What happened to you? She didn't answer, but the faintest flicker of doubt flashed across her eyes, as though his words had stirred something inside her. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, Cruz thought he saw a crack in the icy facade she had built, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Victor, however, was watching the exchange with growing impatience. He stepped forward, the smile never leaving his face. Enough with the sentimental nonsense, Cruz. It's too late for this. Fox made her choice, and now you'll make yours. Cruz's jaw clenched, his fist tightening at his sides. His mind was racing, calculating the odds. His gun was holstered, too far to reach, and he was outnumbered. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on him. The air thickened with tension, and his heart hammered in his chest. He couldn't let this be the end. He couldn't go down like this. "You don't know me, Victor," Cruz spat, his voice low, dangerous. "You don't know how far I'm willing to go to stop you." Victor's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Cruz. That's why you're a problem." He motioned to Fox. "She's the key, you see. She's been keeping you in the dark, holding you back. But now you're expendable." Cruz's mind raced faster now, each second stretching into eternity as he weighed his options. He knew this was the moment. Either he fought back or he died right here, right now. He needed a plan. He needed a way to turn this around. Then he saw it, the smallest shift in Fox's posture, the faintest twitch of her finger on the trigger. She wasn't as steady as she had been before. There was doubt there, just beneath the surface. She wasn't fully convinced this was the right thing to do. Without warning, Cruz lunged forward, knocking Fox's gun to the side as he tackled her to the ground. The gunshot rang out, but it missed him by inches, the bullet embedding itself in the concrete floor. "Fox!" Cruz shouted as they struggled on the ground, his body pressing hers against the cold floor. "Snap out of it. This isn't you. You've been lying to yourself. Don't let him control you." Fox's eyes flashed with fury, but there was something else there too, something fragile. She shoved against him, trying to break free, but Cruz held her down, pinning her arms to the ground. "Listen to me," he demanded, his voice rough with urgency. "You think you're doing the right thing, but you're not. You've been played, Fox. He's using you." For the first time since their confrontation began, Fox hesitated. Her breath was ragged, her face flushed with anger, but something in her expression changed, something that wasn't just rage. Victor's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Enough, Fox. Get him off of you." Fox's eyes flicked to Victor, and Cruz saw the tension in her body tighten. But she didn't move. She stayed where she was, caught between loyalty and doubt. Cruz saw his opportunity. He shoved Fox off him and rolled to his feet in one fluid motion, his hand flying to his side to grab his gun. "Fox!" Cruz shouted again, his voice desperate. "Don't do this. You're better than him. You have a choice." Fox was frozen for a moment, torn between the life she had built with Victor and the remnants of the person she once was. But then, with a sharp cry of frustration, she turned on Victor. "No!" she screamed. "This ends now." Fox grabbed the gun from her holster and aimed it directly at Victor, her hand shaking with the weight of the decision. Victor's eyes widened in shock, but he didn't have time to react before Fox pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot was deafening, echoing off the walls of the warehouse. Victor's body jerked violently as the bullet struck him, and he fell to the ground in a heap, his lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. Cruz stood there, motionless, as the silence of the warehouse descended like a heavy fog. Fox stood over Victor's body, her gun still aimed at the fallen man, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. I didn't." Fox's voice cracked, the words barely a whisper. Cruz took a step forward, his hand outstretched, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and relief. "It's over, Fox. It's over." But Fox didn't lower her gun. Her hands trembled, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. "I didn't have a choice, Cruz," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "You didn't," Cruz replied softly. "But you're free now." She lowered the gun, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the weight of the past seemed to lift, even if just for a moment. Chapter 10: The Reckoning. The morning light filtered weakly through the cracked windows of the abandoned warehouse. Cruz stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Fox, who was still holding the gun in her trembling hand. The body of Victor, the man who had orchestrated their lives into a twisted web of lies, lay motionless at their feet. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the weight of what had just happened. Fox's eyes were distant, as if she were somewhere far away, lost in a world of her own thoughts. Cruz knew she wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at the ghosts of the choices she had made. It had all led to this moment, a single, irreversible act that had sealed their fates. He couldn't help but feel the crushing weight of it all. The case that had started as a simple investigation into a series of murders had now unraveled into a betrayal of every kind. But there was no turning back from this point, no rewriting the past. Fox, Cruz said softly, stepping closer. His voice was calm, but edged with the years of pain he had carried. You did what you had to do. We both know that. She didn't answer at first. The gun lowered slightly, but she didn't let it fall completely from her grip. There was a hollowness in her eyes now, something that Cruz had never seen before, like a part of her had died along with Victor. I thought I was doing the right thing, she whispered, more to herself than to him. But look at what I've become. I killed him, Cruz. I killed him. You didn't have a choice, Cruz replied firmly. Victor was going to use you, destroy you. You did what anyone would have done to survive. She looked up at him then, her eyes filled with sorrow. But at what cost? What's left of me now? What's left of us? There it was, the question that had been gnawing at both of them from the start. What was left? The lines between right and wrong had blurred, and the choice to walk away from this life had long since faded. The streets they'd once walked together were gone now, swallowed by a darkness neither of them could escape. There's nothing left, Cruz admitted quietly, except us, and we'll deal with that, together. Fox looked at him, her gaze softening just slightly. It was a look of recognition, like the last trace of humanity she had been holding on to. It was the same look she'd had when they were partners, when they trusted each other with their lives. It was still there beneath the guilt, the shame, the pain. Do you think we can start over? She asked, the question trembling on her lips. Cruz hesitated. He didn't have an answer for her, not yet. What did starting over even look like after everything they had been through? After the blood on their hands, the bodies left in their wake? I don't know, he replied finally. But we'll figure it out. Together. He took another step toward her, and this time she didn't back away. She didn't even flinch when his hand reached for the gun, taking it gently from her grip. She let him. With the gun now in his hand, Cruz looked down at the weapon for a moment, the weight of it feeling like a symbol of the final step, the end of everything, the end of the case, the end of their partnership, the end of the darkness that had consumed their lives. But that didn't mean it was the end of everything else. There was still a world outside this warehouse, still a city filled with people who didn't know what had transpired in the shadows. And somewhere in the depths of that city, there were still answers, still mysteries to solve, still lives to save or destroy. Fox's voice broke through his thoughts. What now, Cruz? The question lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of uncertainty. Cruz met her eyes one last time, the two of them standing at the crossroads of their lives. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what the future held for them. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. We start by leaving this place, he said, his voice steady, resolute. We move forward, step by step. We find out what's next. Fox nodded slowly, her eyes still haunted but no longer empty. She had taken a life, but in doing so, she had regained something, something she thought she had lost forever. She had chosen survival. She had chosen herself. As they walked out of the warehouse, the morning sun hit their faces like a new beginning. The world around them was quiet, But for the first time, Cruz didn't feel the weight of the streets bearing down on him. Maybe, just maybe, they could leave it all behind. But that was a thought for another time. For now, they had a long road ahead of them, and whatever came next, they would face it together.